Brendan Cleaver is from Cleaver Strata Consulting, and certainly he is all about tendering for apartments, and something that we are very excited to have in our midst. And I'm very appreciative of Cleaver Strata Consulting for their sponsorship. Because at the end of the day, I had a very interesting conversation the other day, Brendan, with a group of owners who are about to get some works done on their building, and they were a small contingency were very had a strong angst about the fact that this project manager had been appointed over another project manager that they preferred, right? And they were like, well, how do we trust this project manager? How do we know that this project manager is doing the right thing? And I said, well, I don't know about you, but I have worked in apartments and also in construction for about 9 years now. And if I was looking at that engineering plan and the construction plan, I wouldn't know what I'm looking at. And if I don't know what I'm looking at, do you know what you're looking at? So why would you then actually think that you can oversee these works when in fact you need a specialist to oversee these works? And if you get a project manager in, he comes with public indemnity insurance, right? So he doesn't get it right, then you can sue him, okay? So, and it was a very interesting conversation. And this was a situation where this one woman had actually put off any works being done for at least 2 to 3 years. And our involvement in that AGM was a great way to show that she was the one that was causing all the issues. But ultimately, what the committee was doing in terms of choosing a project manager to oversee the building works was the right outcome. So you must see that a lot, Brendan, in your job.
I do, Sam, and I think what I'm seeing is a lot of strata companies now, in relation to tendering major works, they're aligning with one particular project management company. So they're just relying on that company to facilitate and underwrite their risk on big projects, and sometimes that may not always be the best choice for a
Well,
particular
no.
project. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think there's, like you're talking about soon, in terms of your presentation, there's lots of things that you actually may tender, right, within an apartment
correct,
complex.
correct.
Your
Yeah,
landscaping services, your strata management, your building management, so at the end of the day, you want to make sure that when you're actually making those decisions, it's not just on a gut instinct, that you actually have got some kind of matrix on which you're going to score them.
yeah, that's correct, Sam. And I think a lot of mistakes that owners, committees make is they get confused and they get lost in the process of making big decisions. And I guess that's where structure comes in to a process of conducting a tender,
Mm,
where if we're running a tender, and I'll run through some of our guidelines a little bit later on in the slide,
mm,
we actually have key elements of the structure that we follow as part of the process. The committee or the owners corporation appoints us, understands that process, and we follow that process to the letter. The committee and the owners corporation have engagement and involvement in that process as well. So they
mm,
are involved, even though we're steering the ship.
mm,
But
mm.
the outcome is to provide better results, better um, candidates for each tender, whether it be strata management, building management, concierge, large cleaning contracts,
Mm,
and those type of things, those type of tenders. Predominantly, we're running, I guess, more so strata management, BMC agreement tenders. We're running a few BMC tenders at the moment for large stratum schemes, which are quite
mm,
complex.
mm,
And it was good to see Angus again today. I sat on a panel podcast with a few of his team and some other strata managers a couple of weeks ago at Parramatta. And we're talking about the complexities of big schemes and stratums. So I think the BMC tenders tend to be a bit more complex
mm,
because a lot of things, lot of lack of understanding of BMCs and what a strata manager actually does.
mm,
And it
mm,
doesn't fit under the strata management legislation. It sits under a separate legislation. So
mm,
community association tenders and yes, the building management tenders. We're conducting a lot of building management tenders now and outsourcing a lot of these services now for strata managers as well.
mm,
Because I
mm,
think often what we might see with the strata management company running a building management tender, it'll be the same companies presented for every tender, maybe potentially the ones that they're aligned with, or the ones that they're just used to using. So there's lack of attention to go to the market overall or consider, some of the higher performing managers in that sector for inclusion in your tender. Um,
I agree. And I think at the end of the day as well, when we're actually seeing, basically what we call, a situation where it's a commercial build virtually, right? So if you like some of these buildings that we're seeing in Victoria, there's 1,000 apartments in the complex,
mm,
and they're part of a much larger strata scheme, which includes a shopping centre and
correct.
basketball courts and a childcare centre, and because there's overall 5,000 apartments in this precinct. That, with all due respect, that's above and beyond even my skill set in terms of finding the right kind of consultants or suppliers to come in, and also then making sure that the contract we have with them allows us to hold them to account, right?
That's right, because often within those stratum schemes or BMC structures, you're dealing with often big commercial operators, shopping centre operators, local councils, maybe even the developer retains a large commercial component of that stratum. So often they might use their influence or their voting rights within the SMS or the strata management statement, sorry, to promote their own needs and not necessarily the benefits of the owners corporation or yeah the collective within that stratum. I think one of the things that I find when we initially meet to talk to, say, a strata committee that may be deciding to go to tender is how long that they put up, often with poor service or high churn of strata managers, which I'll discuss a little bit later in my process. But I've run tenders, over the last 10 to 15 years where they've put up with bad service for a long, long time. And often there was a building in Crow's Nest I ran a tender and they'd been with the same strata manager for 20 years. Now, all those 20 years weren't necessarily all unhappy days, but towards the latter end of that tenure of that strata manager, a lot of things started to fall apart. New committees came in and they essentially, I guess, understood that they had a role to play in the committee to test the strata manager's quality of management, whether were being accountable and whether they're attending to the important needs in the building. So I think often people find it too hard to make the decision to either run a tender themselves if the committee run it, or make the decision to reach out to an independent consultant. And I think that the choice of finding a new strata manager or building manager often becomes too daunting for them. So often they just give up and keep putting up with bad service. That's a very, very common element I see, and I think a lot of the tenders that we tend to run, majority are larger facility managed sites, where often there's a lot of different players in that building, and often the strata managers just rely on with the building manager to run the building and put it on remote control and hope that everything works out okay. But I believe that strata committees are now becoming more educated, and it was good to see Angus Aberdeen talking about some of the processes they're implementing now to make strata managers more accountable and committees. And I think strata committees and owners are becoming far more educated, I would say, in the last 10 years more predominantly. I've been around the industry 30 odd years in different roles that I've conducted for the industry. But I think I've seen more so that in the more recent years, yeah, people are becoming more educated and they want their strata manager or their building manager or their concierge or their cleaners to do a really good job so they provide value for money.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's
Mm,
important, because at the end of the day, some of those complexes are turning over, millions and millions of dollars, and actually spending millions and millions of dollars on their suppliers. And so, this is kind of like it's no small feat, right? And it's important that people understand that when they're spending other people's money, that they need to be finding best value for money, but also then consistency with service, and they don't want to appoint somebody who's going to give them a nightmare from day one. They want to actually make it a relatively straightforward process, correct?
That's correct. And I guess sometimes it is a little bit like a matchmaking process, if we can use that analogy, where we're conducting a tender, to find the right alignment between the owners, the committee, and a potential strata manager. And there's a lot of strata companies in New South Wales alone. I think we have more than 300, probably more now, because a lot of managers are branching out on their own and setting up their own boutique agencies now from the big companies. So there's a lot more choice out there, and I think it becomes daunting and hard for people to make that choice. And that's where I think a tender can add really good value.
Good. So talk to us about why you might do an independent tender, Brendan.
Sure, Sam. Yeah, so look, I've provided some highlight points here. I've made a couple of extra notes just while I was sitting in on a couple of the other sessions because there was a lot of good topics that were coming up that were prompting me to just elaborate a little bit more. But I guess some of the key elements, poor service delivery, and that could be things like not holding regular meetings or AGMs. I've seen that a lot. Strata schemes are supposed to have an annual general meeting every calendar year from the first AGM, and sometimes you see they don't have an AGM for a couple of years. So you think to yourself, well, why isn't that being convened by the strata manager, or is the committee delaying it because it's too hard to get everyone together in a room? Not notifying owners or committee members on important matters and projects. I think that tends to be a lack of communication issue that I see a lot. Strata committees telling me that they never hear from their strata manager, lack of response times, not being accountable to KPIs if they've been set. If it's 24 hours to return a phone call or 48 hours to return an email response, if they're just not doing this, people get really frustrated, owners and committees alike. Uh, the second point I had was a disconnect from the owners corporation, the appointed committee, and I guess that boils down to a potential lack of attention and understanding by the strata manager as to what's actually going on in the building, the personalities within the building, people's different needs that they have, and the desires and the outcomes that they want for their building. If there's no alignment there, there can be a real disconnect. And if it's a building, especially where a committee is actively involved in the building, they want the strata manager to be aligned with their goals. I think that's a very common thing I see that they just don't hear from the strata manager, or they just don't get back to them.
But Brendan, how many times, I ask when people ring me up and say my strata manager is not responding to me, I
Mm,
say to them, what are you paying your strata manager? Right? And they tell me what they're paying their strata manager as an annual fee. I'm like, well, if you want more attention, you probably need to actually, make more regular touch points where they're actually getting paid for it. And I know that sounds kind of like contradictory, but really at the end of the day, you pay
mm.
for what you get, don't you?
Absolutely. And obviously, we've seen low management fees over the years because the industry's been largely underwritten by insurance commissions and other fees. I know that Angus talked about before, and we've talked about as well, Sam. And I think that's brought management fees down, and I think in effect that's brought service standards down too. Because if the average fee is somewhere between 180 to $200 a lot, um, as a consultant or a professional, if you're charging a fee to somebody for $200, you're probably only going to get an hour of somebody's professional time a year. Sometimes schemes require more than that. So I think, in a way, in my opinion, I think the industry as a whole, and I'm not pointing fingers, but I think the industry is a little bit to blame to let that happen, where that um, the fee doesn't really align with the quality of service, and that's where people get frustrated. Um, Mismanagement of schemes, I guess, and lack of transparency, I guess, around insurance commissions and disclosures, treating owners with contempt. Sometimes I see that where strata managers will only respond to committee members, they won't respond to owners, and they don't communicate with everybody, or they don't create um, online portals or communication channels where everybody can be involved in the building, in the key decision-making decisions. One of the other points I had was lack of attention to regular maintenance and key future items. I think this is a common thing we see with buildings where regular cleaning services are not monitored. Building management tasks are not monitored if there's no online building management portal for a larger building. And I think often it's very easy for a set and forget model to be put in place for buildings and no regular sort of check that the strata manager is attending to all the important tasks of maintaining a building on a regular basis. I think the next point, strata manager experience, not aligned to the needs of the scheme and high turnover. Angus covered this again before. It's a big industry issue. We really don't have enough strata managers in the industry to service the needs of all the owners' corporations in New South Wales. So we're seeing a very high turnover of staff, and often it means if a strata manager is appointed to a building, often there's not a lot of thought into who's the right physical strata manager for the building. That building just simply gets slotted into somebody's portfolio, and they may not even be have the experience to manage something like a really large mixed-use scheme. Even especially with new developments, which we also provide consultancy on setup processes for. Um, the developer has a discussion with the business development manager of the strata company. They appoint the strata manager at the inaugural general meeting, and then often an inexperienced strata manager who can't handle a new building is given that role, and they only have 1 year. So it's not a very good recipe for success, I believe, if you don't have the right alignment of strata manager, whether it's a new building or an older building that may be out of warranty, but that has some issues. That's a very common thing that we see as well. Conflict of interest between related parties has been discussed. I guess strata companies owning fire companies, insurance agencies, building management companies, and legal firms. We've seen that. It's been
Property
talked about.
management. Yeah.
Property management. Yeah, I mean, if it is disclosed, I think there's a lot of people in the industry will say that that's ticking the box and that's compliant. But I see a lot of disclosure agreements in strata management agreements where the disclosure elements are not very clear. Like they're disclosing a conflict of interest, but I think just because you disclose it, in my mind, doesn't always make it an absolute not a conflict of interest.
Correct.
It's
And I
very
often find it
important.
in small print, like in the last page, right? So, and I always say, from my perspective, when someone says there's a conflict of interest, that's a buyer beware moment for me, right? And we've had situations, albeit in Victoria, where a strata management firm has a property management firm and they've had enough landlord proxies that they've managed to actually elect the committee for this particular building, and they comprise solely of their staff. Now,
Yes.
that's clearly not okay. But no one's challenged them to the point where they've been caught red-handed, except for us. We've now got an investigation occurring with Consumer Affairs Victoria. But those are the kinds of things you don't want to get yourself into, correct?
No, no, and I guess if there's not enough owners or committee members being actively involved in the building, and it's sort of almost like a set and forget type of model, then these things can continue for a long time, and it's the same outcome that can continue. Sorry, for bad management. If nobody really calls it to attention, it just goes on and on. And often it's to the detriment of the strata scheme in the owners long term if nobody's
Correct.
really testing the market. And that's essentially what a tender does. It's testing the market and looking at all the suitable options for any particular building that are out there. And it's not just looking at all 300 strata managers. It may be an agreed group put forward by the committee if we're appointed on a tender, or it may be somebody from our registered panel or somebody that we've worked with on previous tenders that have had great success and a great experience with retention of their buildings as well.
And I think even if you do like your strata manager, or your building manager, I would still suggest that you actually would go out and tender every 3 to 4 years. That would then allow you to actually see if you are still with the right company, right?
I agree, and I think if we're running a tender, I think people that know me know we do run a very fair process, and I think we'll always encourage the incumbent manager to be included in the tender.
Yep.
I think if there's, unless there's absolute dysfunction and they've had enough, and I've dealt with a few buildings like that where they just don't want to include them. But usually I say, look, if it's just a matter of testing the market or you really want to benchmark them against other potential competitors in the market, that it's always a really good idea to include the incumbent manager,
I
and
agree.
yeah, it allows them to give the opportunity to really make improvement.
Yeah. Good.
So the next slide, yep, was some of the reasons for appointing a new agent. I'll just run through these fairly quickly. So I've said here, strata stakeholders seeking clearer, faster, and more consistent communication, along with improved engagement from the managing agent. We've covered that before, but I think communication and engagement, people want to see their strata manager. They want to see them actively involved in the building, and I think when that doesn't happen, that's often a key reason why people will look to go to tender or look for an alternative agent. Stronger financial reporting, clearer budgeting, and better value for fees paid. I think they're all financial elements. Every strata company has different ways of managing finances. Often, a lot of them use some of the similar strata management um, software programs, but I think often committees don't understand that and they get confused if they can't understand a balance sheet. They can't track expenditure, or there's a lack of clarity of expenditure items on financial statements. If it's $60,000 for repairs and maintenance, that doesn't really tell you what's going on. Now, whether that's on purpose or whether it's just a lack of ability to provide clear definition on where money is being spent, I think that's definitely an area where owners definitely get frustrated, and I see that a lot.
Yep.
Uh, Exploring the wider market for suitable managers with proven expertise, solid references, and especially for similar building types. I think this is very common. And we talked about for the sheer number of strata companies and the sheer numbers of building managers. There's probably more building managers out there than strata managers as well. But I think if you're going to the market, it's a good opportunity to look at what else is out there, and people will often use that reason to run a tender and look at alternatives. Stronger compliance support and fairer contract terms. I've said here, help reduce risk and prevent unfavourable long-term arrangements. I think the right strata manager for the building will help you look at all the arrangements and agreements within your building if they're doing the right job. And that can be things like lift agreements, service agreements for mechanical ventilation, yeah, even building management agreements. If those things are not regularly being tendered or reviewed, or they're not going to the market, I think that's often a reason people look at going to tender. And the last and probably the most important point is the contract expiry. We've obviously seen some changes here in the last number of years where agreements can't continue once they're expired. There's a limitation on new buildings. Obviously, the 1 year, there's a 3 year provision on existing strata schemes beyond their first year. I think that contract expiry timeline brings up a really good opportunity for people to make a decision on whether they go to tender or not. And it's probably a good time to start that process, I would say, somewhere between 3 to 6 months prior to that agreement expiring, depending on the size of the building, the number of people in the committee, how actively they want to be involved in the tender process. And I guess things such as the end of developer control in a building after that first couple of years, the developer might have voting rights that favour them in the initial couple of years. Once that is watered down, I think that's a really good time to go out and test the market and just see if the strata manager that was selected by the developer is the right fit for the building long term. They may well be. They may be doing a really good job, and if you go to tender, you might find they're actually doing really great. So that's probably one of the other reasons. Just some quick benefits of running a tender: transparency and fairness. I think we ourselves and other consultants will be aiming to run an impartial process where the market can be tested across the board. It usually should be conflict free and impartial to suit the owners' corporations and the strata committee's needs. That's an important benefit of the tender. Time and efficiency. I guess it's a tender's there to provide structure and to be able to save the owners' corporation the time. that they might require to run their own tender, especially if the committee is not always in alignment and not always agreeing with each other. Sometimes I would say that if an independent consultant's appointed to run a tender, they can be the litmus test, they can be the guiding light through the process to really steer the tender in the right direction. So I think that's definitely a big value in saving time and creating efficiency. Market comparison and benchmarking. We talked before about how many strata managers in the industry. If you're simply going to Google or talking to a friend that has a good strata manager in another building, that may not always be the best fit for your building, right? Because your friend's building might be 20 units, a very simple building. Your building might be 100 units with a building manager, a stratum sort of structure, a major project going on. So I guess not always just relying on a strata management company referral from another building or a friend or something like that. A referral along that basis may not always be the best reasons to choose somebody on that basis. And like I reiterated before, there's so many strata management companies out there. There's some really good performers in the industry, and they're the people that we like to work with and recommend for consideration in tenders. And I guess that's where we help to give that guidance to provide the right direction to committees as to who would be the most suitable companies to start the process with in the tender.
I think
Making
that's
sure that,
important, Brendan, because I think you made a very valid point. Don't ask for someone to refer you when you may have a very different building with very different dynamics and requirements, right? It is about this is what we have to deal with, and do you have the skill set to help us? I think that's a perfect.
exactly, and even in the right choice of strata manager within that company. I mean, if we're running a full
Yes.
tender and we get to the end once we've shortlisted, which I'll run through a bit more on my next slide, we always request that the licensee and the proposed manager from the tendering candidate is brought to the interview so people can get to meet them and make sure that they are the particular strata manager that's going to be put forward is suitable for the building as well. Some other points are obviously obvious things like suitability and long-term fit. You want to make sure if you run a tender that you're selecting the right company for the next 3 years or the next 5 years or 10 years if that works out successfully for you. If you're going to pay the money to run the tender, you want to make sure it delivers good values, good outcomes, and you have the right management structure and the right company and the right manager for the longer term. And things like governance, continuity, and support. I think these are important elements. People like structure. They like to know what they can expect from a strata management company and their strata manager. Everyone loves continuity. Everybody wants support from their strata manager, and I think that's a bit of an industry problem because we've got a lack of strata managers. We've got often strata managers within companies managing 70 plus schemes,
Yeah.
sometimes more. And I think that becomes a hard task because they're being overloaded because there just simply aren't enough experienced strata managers in the industry. And that's often one of the reasons why people move on.
Yeah, correct. And you do want smooth sailing, don't you? That's the whole idea about a strata manager or a building manager. When you give them instruction, next time you meet, you want to know that that has been actioned. You don't want to have a situation like you said. I've got
Mhm.
an OC, and they instructed, to do a special levy at their AGM in April, and we're now in October, and the committee is saying, why haven't you actually actioned that levy? And it's not been included in the AGM minutes, and they're all indicators to me that that strata manager is not coping.
Yeah, and I guess you can't always blame the strata manager, right? We're an industry collaborator. We're not our organisation is not an anti-strata organisation. We like to collaborate with the industry and help strata managers as well through the difficult periods that they're going through at the moment and the challenges that they're having. So I think it's often hard for a strata manager if they're being overloaded to do a good job. That's why the choice of strata manager and the company is a really key part of the process. Just the key 6 points of a tender, I'll elaborate on the next slide, but the first is the decision to tender, I guess, making the decision to go to the market. The committee is often the driving factor behind this decision, and they're usually the people that we would speak to initially and meet with and talk to them about their needs for their tender. The next step would be, once we have engagement, is arrange a site meeting with the committee to talk about what they want out of the tender, what are their desired outcomes, what style of management they're after, what type of management fee structure. Do they want strata commissions included, excluded? Do they want inclusive disbursements, bundled disbursements? Well, however they like the structure of the agreement to form, then we'll include that as part of our expression of interest that we will prepare and go to the market for them, which is the next step. So once we agree on the process for the tender, we'll prepare an expression of interest. We'll send that out to their agreed tender panel with our consultation and their input as well. The next step is the proposal evaluation, is reviewing all the proposals. Often proposals can be quite lengthy. Sometimes they can be 20 pages. Sometimes they can be 50 pages. And often what I see, sometimes they don't always hit the mark. You've been given an expression of interest. It's usually very clear as to what the requirements are of the owners corporation. I often get responses back sometimes that it's just a pro forma proposal, or they're not really understanding the requirements of the EOI. So effectively, as part of the proposal evaluation, we go through all the proposals with our team. We've developed an evaluation model and matrix rating system to evaluate proposals and help the owners corporation to further shortlist the candidates based on their responses and their ability to understand the proposal and where they would like to move to the next steps of the process. Next step is the candidate interviews, which I've covered before, which is a formal interview where we'll help the committee develop questions around their needs and the requirements of the tender. They're usually quite hard-hitting questions. They're not easy questions. They're designed to make sure that the strata manager and the company that's put forward is a suitable candidate for that building. And they will often allow the committee to open up at the end and ask their own questions to the proposed strata managers as well. So they tend to get a feel of their responses and they can evaluate them on their responses as well. And the last stage is obviously the selection and transition process that we assist with, or any consultant should be assisting with as well. Once they've made a decision, they need to know how to facilitate to move to the next steps of the tender process and appointing a new agent.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I'm going to move on through this because you've just talked about it, and I'm just conscious of time, and you've got a couple of case studies here, which I think is great.
Sure. Yeah, so just a couple of quick case studies. The first one was a large stratum scheme up in Terrigal, which is behind the Crown Plaza there, if everyone knows that, on the beach. Quite a big building. It was developed probably about 10 years ago. It has a commercial floor plate, it has a residential component, and quite a large commercial component downstairs. So it's a stratum structure. We were appointed to run the building management tender there initially, which we conducted because the building management contract expired. We assisted them by running a detailed tender process, went to the market to, I think there was about 5 building management companies invited to tender. We ran the process. The committee selected their preferred building manager and engaged with them under a new contract. During that period, the strata manager current strata manager at the time was actually put under administration. So we were then appointed to run the BMC and the strata management agreement tender as well. So there were 3 tenders we ran for them. So we assisted them via a similar process. The outcomes for that were improved service alignment and competitive contracts across the board. The benefit to the owners was increased accountability, improved reporting, and better value for money.
And I think that's the thing, is that people may say, "Oh, do we engage, a company to help us with the tender process?" But ultimately, if you're getting better value for money, and there's a sense of, it's a bit like interviewing someone for a job, right? You always like to have a recruitment company in with you or someone of that nature, because they're going to see aspects about that person that you may not see. And so if you like them and then you like what they're saying, a lot of times a committee will say, well, they sound pretty good, but you're actually doing the due diligence. You're saying, well, hold on here. Did they meet this mark? Did they meet this objective? Is this the criteria that they're meeting? And I think it's that voice of reason that's worth having in the room, right?
That's right. Yeah, and that's why we're running a tender. We're there to give guidance. We're not there to make the decision for them. We're there to help them through the process and steer them through what could quite often be quite a difficult and daunting task.
Yeah, it can
The
be quite
second case
overwhelming.
study, yeah, was a quite large cluster strata development down in Oatlands. They've been with the same company for about 20 years. There was some change within their structure. There was a lot of staff losses, and they basically, what I felt, that strata manager really took the eye off the ball of this quite significant development in that area. And they decided to go to tender. We started with 7 strata candidates. They're invited. We used a matrix scoring process and evaluation to help them to shortlist from there. We then conducted the formal interviews as well. So they then appointed a new agent, and we also helped them implement a building management portal. They never had quite a large scheme, 135 townhouses. Even there's no closed communal areas like a normal vertical building. There was still a great need for somebody to have some adversary role to oversee all the activities like pool maintenance, a large landscaped area. So we helped them integrate a building management portal for their building management program as well during the process. The outcomes there were improved professional management, greater committee owner transparency. That was a big concern to them. And the benefits were better access to information, clearer oversight, and smoother day-to-day operations.
And I think that's important, isn't it? Is that ability to be able to go onto some kind of app or process of that nature and just say, right, these jobs that we've been allocated have been done. This is, where we sit with our finances. Like those things, owners, are entitled to know. It's about actually how do we actually provide that if they've not had that oversight for such a long time.
Yeah, and I guess the tender is a really good opportunity for a reset for the building. A lot of different platforms, whether it be not just strata management, it may be looking at the building management during that process, seeing that if that is aligned with their needs, assisting with other areas where we have expertise and contacts to help them. So yeah, that's essentially what we do. Yeah, and so
That's
happy to
very
answer
good.
any questions or
Yes,
whatever you
we've
got
got
time
time
for.
for 1 or 2 questions. Anybody got any questions? If you'd like to raise your hand or pop it into the chat. I think, at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is have a level of complacency about your building or your community. And I think that, if you've actually got a strata manager or a building manager who's actually not meeting the mark, you don't want to put up with it for too long because then ultimately someone who's complacent can cause a lot of damage, can't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, yeah, the more you delay it, as you've said, the greater the problems become. And I think a tendering structure is a really good way to test all those elements and create improvement and value for any strata asset.
I think it keeps people on task, Brendan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's a good outcome. Thank you for your presentation. I
Pleasure.
really found that enjoyable.